Indifference curve. Good morning, students. Today's topic is indifference curve. As in the last class, we have learned the marginal utility. The law diminishing marginal utility is exemptions, its features, and goods consumption of goods in two levels goods and one level of goods. Today, we will be going to learn indifference curve. An indifference curve shows different combinations of two goods that yield the same level of utility or satisfaction to the consumer. When a consumer purchases two goods, but definitely he cannot purchase the same quantity of two goods, and if that level is known as indifference curve. That's why it is considered game is given as indifference, as both the curve will not be same. An indifference curve is downward sloping convex to the origin. Smoothness of the curve implies that the two goods x and y are perfectly divisible into very small units. Indifference schedule. It is a tabular presentation of various combinations of two goods that yield the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. Indifference schedule, you can see there units of commodity y, units of commodity x. MRS xy equals to change in y upon change in x. Combinations, you can see A, B, C, D, E, F, the goods. Units of commodity also you can see there 16, commodity of x, that is 1. You can see equally the same level the y and x is not consumed by the any of the consumer instead of except the D. Marginal rate of substitution also we can see how the consumer is balancing between y and x commodity by shifting the prices. Mere change in the prices of y they can increase the level of x. So that is change of y upon change in x. Delta sign is for change. As from A to B, the consumption level has been changed. Units of commodity from Y. The consumer start purchasing from 16 to 11. How it has been shifted by decreasing the 5 units of commodity Y. He had able to increase the commodity from 1 to 2. So by the change in Y is 5 and change in X is 1. So the second level when we see here the C. Here we can see there from 11 to 7 how the consumer had from C. You can see the C where how the consumer 7 to 11 to 7 it has declined 6 unit 4 units of Y to increase one more unit of X, that is 11 to 7 it had declined and 4 unit has been sacrificed of Y to increase one more unit of X. So change in Y, how much we are seeing 11 minus 7, that is 4, and change in X, how much we are seeing 1. 3 minus 2 equals to 1. Next level D, when we are purchasing from 7 we have sacrificed the commodity Y to 4. It means 3 units of Y has been sacrificed to increase one more unit of X. Here it is a level where the consumer can get equilibrium by purchasing 4 units of Y and 4 units of X. And the next level so on, here it is decreased, so increase one more unit of X. Figure 2.4 has quantity of goods on both axes. On the horizontal axis, quantity of goods X are measured, and on the vertical axis, quantity of goods Y are measured. Point A show one combination of quantity of X and Y. All points like points A, B, C, D, E and on an indifference curve shows same level of satisfaction. That is, they are equally desirable to the consumer or he is indifferent between them. An indifference curve is labeled as I. Also, any point below the indifference curve, point N, shows an inferior bundle. A higher indifference curve shows a greater amount of satisfaction and a lower one lesser satisfaction. So here we can see their preferred bundle. We can see there commodity X and commodity Y, where 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the unit of X and 0, 2, 3, 4, 6 is the commodity Y. We can see how the same tabular data has been expressed in terms of graph. Here we are seeing there has 1 unit of in the first A combination we are seeing there When 1 unit of x was there, the commodity of y was 16. When the commodity y x has been increased from 1 to 2, the commodity of y has been changed from 16 to 11. So here is the line which we are drawing. Same way it is declining, increasing x from 2 to 3, it has been changed to 7, and when it is 4 to 4, and same way 2 to 5 and 6 to 1. So this is the way the line is drawn, and this graph which we are seeing here, curve, this curve itself is known as indifference curve. That is, they are equally desirable to the consumer, or he is indifferent between them, and indifference curve is labeled as I. This curve itself is considered as I. You can see here after f I is written, and this is the name of the curve. And also any point below the indifference curve, point N, shows an inferior bundle. A higher indifference curve shows a greater amount of satisfaction, and lower one lesser satisfaction. Indifference map. A family of indifference curves is called an indifference map. Means same way, if we are seeing two and more goods, more than two goods, same way the indifference curve is shifting from left to right. That one by one shifting is considered as indifference map. It gives a complete picture of a consumer's scale of preference for two goods. Figure 2.4 illustrates an indifference map. In the figure, indifference map is a set of four different indifferences, curve I1, I2 and so on, which is reflecting a different level of total utility. Higher the indifference curve, more is the level of utility. Arrow indicate that bundles on higher indifference curves are preferred by the consumer. Properties or features of indifference curve. There are three features of indifference curves as regard their shape. These are downward sloping to the right, convex to the origin, and two curves do not intersect each other. Let us see downward sloping to the right. Any downward sloping curve expresses the basic idea that if the quantity of one good is subtracted, then the quantity of the other good has to be increased to compensate the consumer and leave him with a new bundle equivalent to the first. Here it is said that in simple sense, income of the person is not increasing as his want is increasing. But with the same income, he had to make himself satisfied with the two given bundles of goods. By if he want to increase consumption of one goods, definitely it has to sacrifice the cost of another goods. Convex to the origin. An indifference curve is convex to the origin because of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Here it is convex. It is seen how it is going towards the zero. So an indifference curve is convex to the origin because of dm rate of substitution. The slope of an indifference curve is called marginal MRS of x for y, symbolically denoted as MRS xy. It is defined as the amount of y that a consumer is willing to substitute for an additional unit of x. How we were doing when we were sacrificing the cost of y, we were able to increase 1 unit of x. The slope measures the substitution ratio between the two goods. The slope of an indifference curve is defined only for movement along the curve, and we take absolute value of the ratio. It is shown in figure 2.6. Slope of indifference curve equals to change of y upon change in x equals to MRS xy. MRS xy is the rate at which the consumer trades off y for x. Diminishing marginal rate of substitution. MRS xy must be diminishing as consumer moves along the curve to the right. This is because as the consumer has more and more of x, its subjective worth or marginal significance to him declines, and that of scarce commodity y goes up. He is willing to give up less and less of y for an additional in x. Therefore, MRS xy is diminishing, that is slope is diminishing. It implies indifference curve is convex to the origin. Preferences of this kind are called convex preferences. Convex preferences means and the amount of goods x increases, the rate of substitution between goods x and goods y diminishes. Two curves do not intersect in indifference curve. two indifference curves do not intersect each other. If they intersect, say at point B in figure 2.7, then we get contradictory result in terms of preference ranking. A higher indifference curve represents a higher level of satisfaction. As in that indifference map we have seen I4, a higher indifference curve shows a higher level of satisfaction. It is because of the assumption that preferences are monotonic. Since higher indifference curve represent more quantities of one or both goods, a higher indifference curve shows higher utility level. So that is the, we can see the map of that indifference map. Here we can see the down I1 is the lower satisfaction of indifference and the I4 is the highest levels of satisfaction. So that was the indifference curve analysis. In the next class we will be going to learn budget line or income line.